Okay, Elixir, one of the two things that your opponent knows about and you don't. However, working it out has always been a secret skill in Clash Royale that not too many people talk too in depth about. Today I hope to go pretty in depth into one of your favourite Clash Royale techniques and uncover the mysteries of your opponent's Elixir bar. So, counting Elixir was a concept founded in competitive games as players wanted to get an edge onto their opponent. For those competitively playing strategy games before Clash Royale, it was obvious that extracting information from your opponent was going to give you an edge in a game. We'll get more into that later, but I know you're all here to discover how on earth you're supposed to know a number that is both hidden from you and constantly changing. I'm no expert, but with the right techniques, anyone really can be. So to count Elixir is best done through counting the deficits in every trade. For every card you play, minus its Elixir cost in your head. For every card your opponent plays, add its Elixir cost on. Every game will start with both players at the same amount of Elixir, so the deficit is 0. But here's an example so that makes sense. If your opponent cycles an Electro Wizard, you're now at +4 Elixir. If you then cycle Archers, you have to minus 3 Elixir from your 4 advantage. 4 minus 3 is 1, meaning you have a 1 Elixir lead. This is extremely simple, right? You just need to keep your base value in your mind and minus your own troops whilst plussing your opponents. Because you are now ahead by 1 Elixir, this means that you will reach 10 Elixir first. This is important, but essentially what it means is that you will have to play first. If you decide to invest a knight in the back, then take your 1 Elixir advantage and minus 3. You now know you're down 2 Elixir, however you do have a knight on the board. Troops on the board are underrated when it comes to spending Elixir. This knight essentially only costs you 2 Elixir because of the trade you made earlier on in the game. That's the key factor to counting Elixir. Some cards are way more potent when you get them for under their cost. A knight, for example, can easily be shut down with something cheap like bats. This negates your original 1 Elixir advantage. However, if you instead sent a Royal Ghost here, then your opponent can't make a positive 1 Elixir trade on it without taking damage. Let's recap. You overall spent Archers and a Royal Ghost, and your opponent has spent an Electro Wizard and Bats. Both of these combos cost 6 Elixir, however you now have a Royal Ghost on the tower. From this one small trade at the start of the game, you've manufactured Royal Ghost hits onto the tower and subsequently a damage lead. That's just a tiny example of a 1 Elixir gain. So imagine this in the hands of a pro player when they've generated massive gains of 4 or 5 Elixir. 1 Elixir in this game is so undervalued, so it's very important to always keep your Elixir managed and have in mind what your opponent is on so you're ready to defend. Sometimes counting Elixir can prove both tedious and difficult, especially when a lot is going on within a match. Luckily there is a valuable portion of the game that can help you regain an idea of how much Elixir your opponent is sat on. Usually after both players have committed to an attack, there's a regen period where you both sit and wait for 10 Elixir. The player who plays first is up in Elixir, because they reach 10 before their opponent. If you are the player to reach 10, then play a 5 Elixir Giant, you can count on your bar how much your opponent is down by. If you were to spend that 5, and then your opponent spends when you hit 8 again, you can almost tell that they needed 3 more Elixir to reach 10 again. This means that you were 3 Elixir ahead, and it's a good idea to push right now to make use of that advantage that you have. If you haven't reached 10 yet, but your opponent has played a card, look to see how much Elixir you need to reach 10 to tell how much you're down by. If they play and you're at 8, then you're down by 2 Elixir as they have just played at 10. This method of counting does not require any actual maths, but only happens a few times every game. It's less accurate but way easier to do. Ideally, you'll be able to do both during the same game and know the exact amount of Elixir that your opponent is on. There are some niche examples where you can struggle, for example against Elixir Collector, however the second technique will be more helpful here as you'll want to count in the reset period. It's almost impossible to count all of the trades and add in when the collector is collecting. Clash Royale flows very well as a game. Once you reach 10 Elixir, you're looking to play cards as to not waste any Elixir that you're generating, as we just discussed. This works out very well. When you're ahead, you will play the first card as to not waste Elixir. When you're ahead, you also wish to attack now as to hopefully take advantage of your opponent's lesser Elixir count. When you're behind, however, you wish to defend now, as to make use of Defender's advantage. Here's a clip from a previous video so I don't have to go over all of that again. In Clash Royale, we spend Elixir to spawn in cards, and eventually over time these cards will obtain damage. We need more damage on our opponent to come out successful over the course of a game. Because Elixir equals cards which equal damage, we can almost compare damage gained to Elixir spent. This can be very easily seen if your opponent just doesn't defend. If you spend 3 Elixir on a bandit, she's just going to go over to your opponent's tower and gain you damage. However, you are now down 3 Elixir, so you spent the 3 Elixir and got some damage. If your opponent also spends a bandit on defense, then their bandit will win due to their crown tower, and will now counterattack and gain them free damage because you both spent free elixir. If you can be the player to defend, and then get the free damage, you're gaining defender's advantage, which can easily win you games alone. Let's focus on that defending thing first. We spend elixir to produce cards to generate damage, so we always spend elixir to produce damage, right? Well, our crown tower gives us free damage, so it's technically worth elixir. If you can defend a 4 elixir unit with just 2 elixir and your crown tower's damage, then you've gained 2 elixir by simply defending. This is the natural flow of Clash Royale that I mentioned. If you're up in elixir, you want to push and make advantage of that elixir. However, if you're down in elixir, you want to defend and try to regain that elixir by using defender's advantage. Basically, if you're low on elixir when your opponent invests, then it's probably a good idea to sit back and regain your elixir. If you're high on elixir though, you will want to punish, although that's something for later on in this video. Counterattacking units are a menace for explaining the strategy. Their existence on the board adds a lot of complications to my explanations, but I'll go through how they should affect your play when you know your opponent's elixir. So, after you defend, you'll most likely be up on elixir due to the theory we just explained about the crown tower. For this example, we will assume that both players are on even elixir. If you have a musketeer that just defended an electro dragon, then you know you're up 1 elixir. But you also have a musketeer on the board. It's easy to think that the musketeer is just worth 4 elixir, but it isn't because it's just been damaged, so we'll say that it represents about 2 elixir. Right now, in this example, you have a physical 1 elixir lead and a 2 elixir musketeer attacking. This means that you're technically up 3 elixir, and when you're up on elixir, you want to be attacking. Putting a Hog Rider in front of this takes 4 elixir away from you, meaning you're now down 1 elixir. You now have a Hog Rider and a half-health musketeer attacking, whilst your opponent only has 1 elixir to defend. Well, good luck to them, because to me this looks like a ton of damage. All you did here was leverage a 1 elixir lead and turn it into damage. Imagine if this was again a 4 or 5 elixir lead. Of course, in a real game, your opponent wouldn't just spend the 1 elixir, but they'd be forced to spend maybe 4 elixir and take some damage. This means that you're now up 3 elixir and got damage. Either way, it's a good trade, and all you did was take advantage of a counterattacking unit. However, it isn't always smart to push in with a counterattacking unit. Say that you use a musketeer to defend some spear goblins or something. That damaged musket puts you down 2 elixir, and maybe also lost 1 elixir worth of health. This means that you're down 3 elixir at this point. If you spend a Hog Rider in front, you're now down 7 elixir. If your opponent spends a Mega Knight to clear all of this up, you now have the same amount of elixir, but are down an entire Mega Knight. This goes back to me saying, imagine if it was a 4 or 5 elixir lead, because your opponent just had a 7 elixir lead and spent it really well. This is called overcommitting, and is something that you can work out if you should do when you know your opponent's elixir. If you're ahead, go hard with those units. If you're behind, stay home and continue to regain your elixir. It's all very simple once you get that initial technique down. Knowing your opponent's exact elixir can lead to a lot more though. You can use it for a ton of things to work around your offensive game plan. If you're up a hefty amount of elixir, you know that your opponent doesn't want to punish your investment, so you can happily invest and take advantage of your advantage. However, if your opponent is up on elixir and you're an investment deck, you can happily wait until they play their punish into you. Defending this will give you an elixir lead, and then you can obviously invest with an elixir lead and with their punish card out of rotation. With a punish deck, you know to not push in when your opponent is up on elixir, because this can cause your opponent to take advantage of those counterattacking units as we discussed before. Although if you're up on elixir with a fast attacking punish deck, then you can happily go in. Here's a tip for that. If you're up 3 elixir with a Hog Rider deck, as soon as you get to 4, spend that Hog Rider. Knowing your opponent is only on 1 elixir, they may have little to no counter to your push. However, if you're up that same 3 elixir and wait until 10, you'll spend that hog when they're at 7 and may get countered by a Mega Knight or something very successfully. Knowing your opponent's elixir not only tells you if you should push, it also tells you how much elixir you should push at. Let's reverse the situation. If you know that you're down 3 elixir against a hog deck, you know that they will be able to afford that hog. Knowing when they're about to push will allow you to be ready with your defensive units almost as a prediction. Skeletons planted extremely early will make a hog get less hits than if they're late because you weren't expecting an attack. This goes for all win conditions, and counting elixir is extremely powerful. We've discussed a little bit about generating leads, but we should go in more. A lot of decks will run cards that allow the user to gain elixir leads and take advantage of their opponent. 2.6 is a great example. Defending a mini P.E.K.K.A or something with an ice golem lets you get an easy +2 elixir trade. This then allows you to push in at 4 elixir, knowing that your opponent only has 2 to deal with. It's very obvious how you generate a good trade, right? You just spend less than your opponent did and boom, you're up on elixir. Continues to do this with a combination of knowing the exact count of elixir in your opponent's bar, and then you're in for a good time. Poor trades can lead you to your opponent having this advantage, so it's important to always weigh up how much you're spending when defending. That's actually a really cool rhyme. Can someone make that jingle for me? K, thanks. Let's talk about potentially compounding your Elixir lead when you know you have one. There's an important concept to understand before we go into this, and that's called using your tower as a resource. So, if your opponent is down on Elixir and decides to let a Mega Minion hit their tower, they may be taking that 500 or so damage in order to regain free Elixir. Once you're in a position as to where your opponent wants to regain Elixir, you can force them into difficult decisions by throwing cards that will gain you damage if they leave them. Some of the best ones are quick high damage cards like Hog Rider. It's unlikely, but if your opponent leaves a Hog, then that's so much damage you get and only lose out on 4 Elixir. Hog Rider is a really efficient card for compounding your lead. Investment buildings are also good, as it makes your opponent want to spend. A Barbarian Heart alone will get a load of damage, but your opponent may not have the Elixir or the will to spend countering it. It compounds your lead slowly but surely, as long as you don't make terrible trades during its lifespan. High value chip cards are amazing at this too, as it's a tough decision for your opponent. Should they just leave that Dark Goblin and regain their Elixir? Newer players may mess up on this quick decision, and this either allows you a ton of damage or the potential to retain your lead if they spend on it. Any card that really makes your opponent want to spend more is good for compounding. Either you will gain damage and lose your lead, or you will potentially just retain or improve upon your lead. A great example is high spell baity cards. If your opponent is down on Elixir, they may still think it's a good trade to Fireball Archers. Sure, they gain 201 damage, which is a good trade, but they just made their Elixir deficit even worse. If you can now capitalize on that, you will most likely come out with more than 201 damage if you know what you're doing. Dealing out X amount of tower damage onto your opponent for Y amount of Elixir is undefined as far as how efficient it should be. The Fireball on Examples Archers from earlier is good, because you spend 1 Elixir to get 201 damage. However, if you're down on Elixir, then your opponent will most likely punish this and gain way more value than you just did. You have to know whether you're up or down on Elixir before committing to something like this. If you're up on Elixir, then take trades like a Lightning onto a Musketeer. You lost 2 Elixir, but got 300 damage, which isn't bad at all. However, if you're down on Elixir, you might only want to take trades like a Lightning onto a Wizard. Here you did still lose 1 Elixir, which can be dangerous. However, 300 damage for that 1 Elixir is maybe too good of a trade to pass up. We've covered how much of a difference 1 Elixir can make, but again, there's no defined damage per Elixir cost that we can follow. Personally, I would say that 200 damage for 1 Elixir spent would be a good average to go off. Sometimes you will just have to weigh up if your opponent can punish your 1 Elixir spent on that Lightning and get over 200 damage for it. Everything in Clash Royale is situational, but I hope today I've taught you the theory behind Elixir counting and management and how to apply it for yourself. This is undeniably a skill that takes a lot of practice, and that's why only a short segment of this video is actually on how to count the Elixir itself. It comes with time, so every game you play, you should attempt to know the exact amount of Elixir in your opponent's hand. Sometimes playing a classic challenge or on a new account can help. Facing easier opponents means that more of your brain power can go into counting Elixir than actually having to outplay your opponent. Once you're a pro with counting Elixir, then boom, take it into a classic challenge or high on ladder and see how many people you can outplay. Your general feeling for being up or down on Elixir will come over time, especially in double Elixir time when it's way too hectic to always be counting. So yeah, that's all for Elixir counting and management. If you enjoyed the ways of explaining, editing, or overall just talking, then please do consider hitting that subscribe button. I have plans to make videos on tracking cycle, and also figuring out matchups in the future. These are the other 2 real key things to becoming a really good Clash Royale player in my opinion, so hey, maybe it'd even help you to subscribe. If you did feel as though this video is helpful in explaining things, then please share it around to anyone. It helps the channel grow a ton if you all give it like 1 share. Finally, if you have any questions at all, hit me up in the comments. I feel as though I can do a good job explaining individually and reply to all of them, so go and do that. Apart from that, boys, thank you for watching, and peace.